From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's today's lineup. Over from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen will discuss the tax code provision called the Qualified Business Income Deduction and questions that he regularly receives about how you farmers, ranchers, and other landowners can qualify for this significant deduction. Also today, K-State's Doug Jardine will reflect on past, present, and future crop disease challenges for you corn, grain, sorghum, and soybean producers upon his retirement this past week from the university after 35 years of service. And later on, we'll welcome back in K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with another commentary on life in rural Kansas. All that and more directly ahead on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, and we're glad to have you listening in once more. For starters, we'll visit with a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, and we will zero in this time around, Roger, on a specific regarding the tax code and an opportunity for agricultural producers potentially to capitalize on something that's called the Qualified Business Income Deduction, which arose here a couple of years back. Before we get into some of the nuances of this and some of the difficulties in interpreting how to use this, explain what this deduction was all about.
Well, this is what took place as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was enacted in late 2017, effective for tax years beginning after 17, so starting in 18 and going through 2025. You can get a 20% deduction for income tax purposes on your federal tax return if you're a sole proprietor, S corporation, partnership, anything other than a C corporation. C corporations are not eligible for a 20% deduction on their income because they got a new lower flat rate of 21%. So they're out of this. And this was to provide a tax break for those businesses that didn't operate in the C corporate form. So you get a 20% flow-through deduction or a 20% straight-up deduction if you're a sole proprietor farmer, for example, against your income. So it's a nice deduction to have, but you got to qualify for it. It's called the Qualified Business Income Deduction. And
to qualify, your operation or entity has to be deemed a trade or business, and there's the interpretation rub, if you will.
Yeah, trade or business, there are various places in the code where trade or business requirement appears. We see it with respect to numerous things in the code. For purposes of the Qualified Business Income Deduction, Section 199A, they grabbed what we call the 162 definition. They're going to route the trade or business requirement through Section 162. Frankly, I think that's a good thing because there's no set definition for trade or business that's there. It's 162 just says you can take deductions associated with your trade or business, and that's been defined by the courts over the years. And IRS specifically in the regulations under Section 199 just said look to 162 in the cases and the rulings over the years that have defined that. We're not going to give any further guidance on that. I view that as good. It's a more restrictive definition elsewhere in the code, but under 162, that means a lot of our rental-type income can be trade or business income, which would be eligible then for the 20% deduction. But it's based on case law, and there's a couple of really good U.S. Supreme Court cases, and one in particular that really lays it out and says it's a facts and circumstances test to determine whether you are engaged in a trade or business for this purpose, which would generate a 20% deduction.
Dig into that case law more, if you will, and how it more or less lends some definition to a trade or business.
Well, to boil it down, what the case law indicates is that you have to be engaged in an activity on a basis that is regular and continuous. So there's your first requirement there, regularity and continuity. And then secondly, you have to be engaged in that activity with the intent to make a profit. So regular and continuous activity, profit intent. The key case was in the 1980s under Section 162, and that was the Gretzinger decision. Gretzinger was a gambler, and he wanted to be able to deduct all of his expenses associated with his gambling activity as a trader business expense, because if I'm engaged in a business activity, then my business expenses are fully deductible. Well, based on the facts of that case, his frequency of gambling transactions, how continuous it was, how regular it was, did he have a profit intent, was he trying to make money off of this? The court said based on all his factors, yeah, he was. He was engaged in the trader business of being a gambler. Therefore, he could deduct all of his expenses. His losses were fully deductible. That case has become kind of the signal post case for determining trader business existence. And so we always use that one to evaluate any particular situation as to whether it actually rises to the level of a trader business for this purpose to get the 20% deduction.
So then translate that into agricultural situations, and the prominent one being land leases.
Rental income.
I
get more questions on whether my rental situation qualifies for the deduction or whether it doesn't. Well, break it out. From a tax standpoint, there's basically three ways we look at leases. Cash lease, the crop share lease, and you can break the crop share lease into two parts, material participation and non-material participation, because there's three different ways we report the income from the lease. And cash rental income flows to a Schedule E. It doesn't pick up self-employment tax. Non-material participation, livestock share, or crop share lease flows to what's called a 4835. Again, no SE tax. Material participation leases go to Schedule F. It's hit with SE tax. Now, another thing to keep in mind with 199A is you don't have to trigger self-employment tax to be deemed to be in a trader business to get the 20% deduction under 199A. And so that's a key point there. And that's the rub for a lot of farmers. Okay, what do I need to do to cross the line to be a trader business to get the 20% deduction but stay under the threshold for self-employment taxability? Because I want the deduction. I don't want to trigger SE tax.
So what's the all-encompassing answer to that question? How does a producer walk that fine line trying to capitalize on the deduction while, again, not triggering that self-employment tax?
Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that lease is in writing. Because if you get audited on this and you don't have a written lease, it's just going to be your word against what IRS is asserting and what their litigating position is or what their position is they're taking on audit. Get the lease in writing. Now, can a cash lease get you there? A straight cash lease, just a straight-up cash lease where all you're doing as the landlord is collecting the rent check, by itself is not going to be enough to get you the 20% deduction. Sure, you don't have any SE tax, but we want to get the deduction. A straight cash lease is not going to get you there. So what I suggest on that, there is a way to convert the cash lease into a qualifying business for purposes of 199A so that I can get a 20% deduction, and that is have a written lease that specifies at least minimal involvement by the landlord, saying, I'm going to mow the lanes, I'm going to survey the situation, I'm going to review things periodically, maybe I'm going to control the weeds, I'll do that, maybe I'll check the fences, those types of things. We can even get down to maintaining insurance on the property, those types of things, but stay out of day-to-day involvement. You can have a provision that says that the tenant needs to run cropping decisions by the landlord. And basically what I would do on that, I would have some language in a lease that kind of is cloudy with respect to that says that, tenant's supposed to talk to me. But basically what you're doing is, if you're my tenant, what I'll do is I'll ask you, what are you going to plant this spring? Right. And then you tell me, and basically I'm saying, yeah. But I've got written language that says there'll be a consultation between the landlord and the tenant, and just leave it at that.
And that could qualify as this material participation.
Based on the cases, I think that might be enough to get you the 20% deduction, but not enough to trigger self-employment taxability. I think there's a way to do that. Now, our non-material participation share lease will get you there too. It's the material participation share leases where now as a landlord I'm involved in making decisions. I'm bearing bearing risk of production. I'm bearing risk of price change. Yeah, that's qualified business income, but that's also SE taxable. One example in my seminars I give to practitioners on this is because they always ask, well, how much involvement does my client have to be able to be in a qualified trader business? And he said, well, think of this. Let's say that you've got a client. Let's take it out of the farm setting for a moment, and then we'll apply this back to the farm setting. Let's say you have a client that does consulting. And maybe it's a farmer, but they do consulting 2 hours a month for $300 an hour. Okay, so you have $600 a month times 12 months. You have $7,200 of consultation income for the year. And I ask them, where do you report that income? And they all say 100%, no matter whether I'm in California or North Carolina or wherever I'm at across the country. Every practitioner nails it. And they said, well, that's obviously Schedule C. That's business income. And then I said, okay, what did you just say for purposes of 199A now? Oh, that is qualified for a 20% deduction. I said, now how many hours a month did your client have in the activity? 2 hours a month. Okay, that's 120 minutes. And then I asked them, how many days are in a month? 30. Mm-hmm. How many minutes a day? It takes what, 4 minutes a day of involvement in the activity, and they all say that's business income. I think you're right. So my point is, now you take it back to the lease situation, it doesn't take much. But your straight-up oral cash lease, no, you're not going to get there. You need to have a written lease that gives you some type of involvement, not much. Now, the 4 minutes a day is not going to be enough for self-employment taxability, but it's enough to get this 20% pass-through deduction. That's the point that I think is the key point to make here. So
producers, as usual, need to look at this with their tax preparer and walk through the necessities, but one can get there. That's the point.
Sure, and when margins are tight in agriculture and financial times are tough, as they are right now, if you're in, say, a 24% tax bracket and you get a 20% deduction, that drops you, I think, to, 19.6? So, yeah, every dollar counts.
If you'd like to read more about this, Roger, as usual, has written up an article on this that he's posted on his blog, capitalizing on the qualified business income deduction and what is considered a trade or business under that tax code definition or court interpretation. And you can find that at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Roger, as always, many thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Over from the Washburn University School of Law, professor of agricultural law and taxation there, Roger McEowen. He's with us every other week here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. And for you, on this segment, something a little unique. It's a retrospect of diseases afflicting our row crops around Kansas over the past 35 years. Why that number? Well, our guest now has just retired from his extended career here at Kansas State University as a research and extension row crop disease specialist. So we wanted to bring him by and have him lend some past, present, and future thoughts on disease challenges in our row crops. Doug Jardine is with us. First of all, congratulations, Doug, on retirement after 35 years at K-State, 42 years in total serving the land-grant system.
Well, that's right. I spent my first 7 years at Michigan State before moving to Kansas State, and I was doing some quick cowboy math the other day, and I figured we've probably done somewhere on the north side of 300 of these interviews over the years.
It's very likely. So it's been a great haul as we look back. But you've taken some time recently as you've been invited to present a seminar or two on your career and our disease portfolio in Kansas, looking at the old and the new and the disappeared as far as pathogens go.
Right. When I was giving my last lecture, as they tend to say, was thinking how to approach it, and I thought one of the ways was, so what diseases were not here when I arrived, and then kind of went through by their chronologically and what their importance or, in some cases, non-importance have been. A few that were maybe established but weren't important at the time, but have reemerged, and then a couple that were very common when I got here that we really can't find anymore.
Well, the ones that have turned up the last 3 decades plus, we'll see some heavy hitters in this lineup, won't we?
Well, absolutely. And the very first one came in, I arrived here in March of 85, and later that summer, we found for the first time a Kansas soybean cyst nematode. And it was found up in Donovan County, just across the river from Rosencrantz Airfield. From there, it spread to somewhere, I don't have the exact count right now, but probably somewhere around 30 or 40 counties. All of the important soybean-producing counties are pretty much known to be infested now. And, of course, nationally, soybean cyst nematode is the number one pest. It's probably number 2 or 3 in Kansas because we have charcoal rot that has always been a significant disease for us here because of our hot, dry summers. But we figure, in an average year, about a 1.5% to 2% loss from soybean cyst nematode. And keep in mind, that's 1.5% or 2% of 4.5 million acres. So it gets to be a pretty big number.
But a great deal has been learned about managing SCN, not only from the varietal selection standpoint, but crop rotation, all of those things culturally that have helped producers contend with this to some extent, have they not?
Well, it has, but in recent years, all of our varieties pretty much in the state use the same source of parental resistance, and the nematode is gradually starting to overcome that resistance. And so it's got extension people and nematologists scrambling to find maybe some new sources that we can get incorporated into some usable varieties. It's a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon.
And another one, while we're on soybeans, that has cropped up as well in more recent years, but it actually has an alliance, if you will, with soybean cyst nematode called sudden death syndrome.
Right, and sudden death syndrome is a soil-borne fungus. It was around 1992 up in Donovan County, again, not so coincidentally, because this disease is highly associated with fields that have cyst nematode in. Because as it turns out, as the nematode burrows into the root, it basically creates a highway for that fungus to follow in and establish itself in the root system. So it's quite common to have SDS and currently SCN infested fields. The good news about sudden death syndrome is in the last 3 or 4 years, our industry has developed some seed treatments that are very effective against it. Not 100%, but can easily increase yields 5-6 bushels an acre or more. And so a lot of efforts in recent years have been introducing these products to growers. We've used them in some K-State trials, so we have not only our own research data, but those from colleagues in other states that all are very similar in saying, yeah, you really need to use these products. Getting a leg up on SDS, that's been good news. On the corn side, gray leaf spot has asserted itself over several years' time now. Right. Gray leaf spot is one of those diseases you probably think has been here forever. It was first known in the 1940s over in Virginia and up in the Appalachian valleys where you get a lot of fog and they do grow some corn in those bottoms. And it gradually worked its way across the corn belt. But it didn't get here to Kansas till 1989. And it was first discovered up in Republic County, probably not so coincidental that it came probably down from our neighbors to the north in Nebraska, being they are such a big corn state. And over the years, it has clearly been our number one foliar disease of corn. We've got varieties that are fairly tolerant, but sometimes those hybrids are not the most productive. And so growers oftentimes tend to use higher yielding but more susceptible hybrids of corn, which means then they're going to require a fungicide out there. And so over the years, we spent a lot of time educating growers about scouting for gray leaf spot, what those thresholds are for taking action. I haven't personally been involved in fungicide trials, but many of my colleagues in other states do fungicide trials. In fact, we have what's called the Uniform Fungicide Trial, where many states have the exact same products out, so that we can make comparisons. And, of course, we do share that data with our Kansas producers. And the good news on that front is there are a lot of products out there that do a pretty good job. But, again, we try and use our best integrated pest management practices and suggest that people scout and only put a fungicide out there if they see something that's worth spraying. Gaining ground on that one as well. Quickly here, some diseases which caused quite a stir upon their debut, but then fizzled. Well, and those are just two quick ones. And, of course, maybe the biggest bust of all was soybean rust. A bust from Kansas standpoint, because that disease continues to be important in Louisiana and Mississippi and occasionally in Alabama. But it was first discovered in November of 2004 We saw it one time in very late 2007. It was October, in fact, on some double crop beans, and we've never seen it since. The other disease then is sorghum ergot. We were back in the mid-2000s. We thought this was going to be maybe the end of sorghum production in Kansas. Well, it didn't turn out that way. But having said that, we still occasionally see it pop up in individual fields. Statewide basis, totally unimportant. But if you happen to be that farmer that has it, it's a concern to you.
Well, looking ahead, what's on the scene now and possibly going to build momentum in the coming years? Are there specific pathogens that you would identify in that way?
Well, there's what we call some reemerging diseases. And so back in the late 70s and early 80s, Goss's blight, or Goss's wilt if you prefer, was a very important disease, especially in western Kansas. And then primarily due to improved resistance in hybrids, it kind of went into the background. And I'll have to say that almost 20 years I was here and never physically saw Goss's leaf blight in a Kansas cornfield. And then in the early 2000s, we started getting some rumblings that it was showing up again in western Kansas, and primarily with some colleagues from what was then Pioneer Hybrid Seeds. They said, well, yeah, we're getting some samples in our clinic in Iowa, and they were very outgoing about sharing that information with us so we could see where it was going. And then around 2004, it was kind of like everywhere for several years, and I got initiated into that. But now the last couple of years, I think maybe the breeders are catching up to it again, and so the reports the last 3 or 4 years have kind of subsided to a great extent. But, so I think this is one of these diseases that will just kind of require eternal vigilance. If we kind of forget about it, it'll sneak back up on us. And then the other disease is Phytophthora root rot in soybeans. We've always addressed Phytophthora as kind of an early season disease where you get these brown stem lesions and the plant eventually dies, maybe in small patches in the field or scattered plants. But there is another phase of the disease that we call the root nibbling stage, if you will, where the fungus just kind of eats away at the fine roots and the secondary roots on the plants, but doesn't actually kill the plant, but maybe causes it to mature prematurely 2 or 3 weeks. And that 2 or 3 week premature maturation will cause some yield loss. And with the last couple of years where we've gotten very heavy rains in August and early September, that disease has really emerged. And especially sometimes in some irrigated fields, you can really see the difference when you go from the pivot out to the dryland corners. The dryland corners are fine, but under the pivot they're not doing so well. So again, variety selection is going to play a major part in dealing with that, but we needed to get the growers educated on what's going on out there because it's something that might not be evident. They say, oh, my field's maturing. Okay, that's fine, but no, it shouldn't be maturing for another 2 or 3 weeks, and so we look at that. Then the other disease in recent years was corn bacterial streak. It's in almost every county in the western half of the state. We are still doing yield loss assessment studies on that to try and determine is it actually causing any yield loss. The main problem with corn bacterial streak to this point is it looks a lot like gray leaf spot to an untrained eye. And people were going out and making unnecessary fungicide applications, getting upset when they saw no drop in disease pressure, and that's because fungicides don't work on bacteria. So we've done a lot of educational work trying to get people to recognize the differences between gray leaf spot and corn bacterial streak.
Well, speaking for many in Kansas agriculture, thanks tons for your devoted service to this industry in the state, and we're wishing you all the best in your retirement. Appreciate it, Doug.
Well, thank you, Eric. And I can assure you no other specialists had as much fun in their job as I've had over the last 35 years here in Kansas.
Doug Jardine, row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Once more, Doug is calling it a career after 35 years in that capacity. We'll be back in a moment on this Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and now today's agricultural news headlines for you. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the Federal Reserve did slash interest rates by 0.5 percentage point in an attempt to give the U.S. economy a jolt in the face of concerns about the coronavirus outbreak. The new benchmark interest rate, 1 to 1.25%. The market also expecting future cuts as early as the April Fed meeting. That according to the CME Fed Watch. Chances that rates will be lowered by another 0.25 percentage point next month were around 50% after the cut announced yesterday morning. But the emergency cut also signals that the outlook for the U.S. economy might have been in more jeopardy than previously thought, according to this report. The U.S. stock market struggled for direction as it balanced the economic stimulus of the rate cut with the statement the rate cut makes about the economy. Back on Monday, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development warned that global growth could be cut in half if the outbreak continues to spread. Many of the world's largest companies, including Apple and Microsoft, have recently issued profit and sales warnings reflecting travel restrictions, factory closures, and supply chain issues. Economists are also wondering how consumer behavior will change because of the outbreak, especially since consumers play such an important role in the U.S. economy. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue told attendees at the National Farmers Union Conference to look at markets to determine their 2020 plantings, but added that he was mulling over adjusting crop insurance rates. Crop insurance guarantees dropped for 2020 compared with last year. The secretary saying, quoting here, "I'm not sure whether we legally have the flexibility to adjust those or not, but that is one of the things we are looking at right now." As prices have gone down, the safety net has gone down as well, said the secretary, and adding that's a serious consideration that we need to look at, in his words. The 2020 corn crop insurance price, $3.88 per bushel. That's down 3% from last year. The soybean guarantee, $9.17 per bushel, down nearly 4% from 2019. And the cotton guarantee, 68 cents per pound. That's down 7% from last year. Britain's position on agricultural trade comes as no surprise to USDA officials who are planning an agricultural trade mission there later this year. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA Undersecretary Ted McKinney was in Britain last month.
When I arrived, I was to meet the Minister of Ag, which would be my counterpart, the Undersecretary. That night, he was elevated to the Secretary, so we had a chance to be the first to meet the Secretary. He was very clear about talking about their concerns about animal welfare. They really have taken those animal welfare standards into different places, different heights.
He spoke last week to the National Association of State Directors of Agriculture, but his comments are relevant because London just indicated it will not budge on animal welfare standards in trade talks. McKinney had anticipated some of the difficulties of restoring a post-Brexit Britain into the world.
To the G7 and into modern science-based decision-making. It will not be easy. It's been a lot of years where they've been married to their friends across the channel.
Britain is the destination of one of the 7 agricultural trade missions USDA has planned for this year. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now to follow up the use of chemical washes on U.S. poultry, as well as Britain's National Health Service, will not be issues that will prevent the U.S. and U.K. from reaching a trade deal. That, according to U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, he believes the two sides can work those things out. The talks expected in the next few weeks. Lighthizer said he believes the poultry issue is kind of a false problem, as he put it. He believes that science-based standards and then consumer preference is what's going to sort out that problem. And the Food Industry Association, along with the Foundation for Meat and Poultry Research and Education, released their 15th annual in-depth study of meat and poultry through shoppers' eyes. It's called The Power of Meat 2020. This report exploring consumption trends, sales growth, and consumer preferences. It found demand for meat is accelerating with $50.5 billion in sales in 2019. The survey took a deep dive into consumer interest interest in topics like production claims and sustainability, with 49% believing that animal agriculture does not have negative impacts on the planet if done properly. The belief that it does have negative impacts is higher among younger generations, showing an opportunity and importance in consumer education. Meat department sales strong in dollars and volume, driven by beef and chicken, and spending per household increased. When it comes to meat consumption, moderation is far more popular than elimination, it says. 83% of shoppers purchase specific cuts of meat, and they're eating smaller portions, but with total volume sales up slightly, that means they are eating less, but more often. The Kansas Livestock Foundation is now accepting scholarship applications for the 2020-21 school year. Scarlett Hagens talks here about the qualifications involved.
The Merck Cartridges for Cash program offers $1,500 scholarships to Kansas State University veterinary medicine students and $1,000 awards to undergraduates studying animal science and planning to be actively engaged in livestock production. Barton County KLA members turned in the most cartridges at the 2019 KLA convention, guaranteeing them a winner provided a qualified student applies. Hampel Oil and Mobile Delvac will offer $1,000 scholarships to juniors and seniors at K-State and Fort Hays State University. Go Bob Pipe and Steel will sponsor a $1,000 award for a student attending a Kansas junior or senior college. Proceeds from the 2019 Kansas Cattlewomen Silent Auction and KLF Club Calf Sale will fund $1,000 KCW and Youth and Agriculture scholarships. Scholarships in the amount of $1,500 will be offered in memory of Douglas A. Lau, a past chairman of the KLA Cattle Feeders Council. This will go to junior or senior students at K-State and Fort Hays State. A $500 scholarship will be given in memory of Fred H. Woodbury from Quinamo. Students residing in Chase, Franklin, Lyon, Osage, and Wabaunsee counties will be given preference. Glenn and Clyde Lindstrom scholarships in the amount of $1,000 also are being offered, with preference given to students in Unified School District 400 in northern McPherson and southern Saline counties. One application applies to all KLF scholarships and can be accessed at www.kla.org. All materials must be postmarked by April 20th. I'm Scarlett Hagens.
And that's what we find on today's agricultural news page. Awaiting with another edition of Stop, Look, and Listen is K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. He'll be in next. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It always is a thrill when family comes home.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I tracked the flight, a United Airlines flight, returned to Amsterdam. The route went from Kansas City to Dallas, Washington, and from Dallas to Amsterdam. I done the same on the inbound flight from Amsterdam to Chicago, then from Chicago to Kansas City. In Kansas City, she picked up a car and drove home to us. No delays on the flight, and no snow on the roads, once in Kansas. Yet, a long travel for a day. However, the adrenaline to get here made it a good day. We had a good fire burning when she stepped in the door through the open garage. As the advertisement says, we will keep the lights on. It's always a thrill when family comes home. And with the computer you can check on the flight's progress. It's amazing when a plane arrives on time or with a good tailwind is pushed along and arrives early. The opposite was a strong headwind, but all went well. The flights arrived early or on time. And now, after her return to the Netherlands, the house is still again. No more singing, only when I put on a CD. She sings and has a good voice. I pick up songs I've never heard before. Different generation, but we enjoy. The last time she was here, we had gone to the Dwight Eisenhower Museum in Abilene. We only could walk the library as the museum was reorganized. That was disappointing. But we walked the limited display and were given free tickets to come back. Tickets valid for free admission. They were valid until 6/30/2020. So, a great opportunity to cash them in. We did that last Wednesday. It was a beautiful Kansas day. And the visit was well worth it. The gift Eisenhower gave to Kansas and Abilene is a beautiful gift. I'm proud to be from Abilene. His words. This time we did not walk to the boyhood home where he and his brothers grew up. His parents were a big influence on him, especially his mother. Learning and education were stressed, as well as the opportunity for the outdoor activities, sports, and country. One visit does not do it right, and we've been there many times, and nearly always with overseas visitors or family. Of course, Ike has been a very important person to us as Commander-in-Chief during World War II. Anneke, my wife, remembers seeing him when she was a child, having joined the throngs of people who came out to cheer him when he visited her hometown, Utrecht, after the liberation. What strikes me is the humility this great man had and the awesome responsibility he carried on his shoulders. Walking and reading the shared information in the museum, you see it again and again. Of course, there is the library for those who want to learn more. But the museum is enough for me, besides the books I have on my shelf here at home. He, General Eisenhower, was part of my life too. I was nearly 13 years old when the war ended. Old enough to remember. You never forget. After the war, I saw a jeep with 2 wheels in the furrow. It pulled a plow. The earth was being turned, needed to be turned, but there were no horses. In my mind, I still see that jeep pull the plow, straight furrows. Later, on a return visit to the Netherlands, pulling off the road to have Dutch pancakes, I saw a jeep, total original, parked under a tree in front of the restaurant. It hit me hard, as that was how you saw them. I remember that scene, also clear as a photo. In 1952, I drove a war jeep, a restored jeep, in Australia, hauling milk cans over the rough farm road. That jeep was flown out from New Guinea, where it was left behind, as so many other war materials things when the Pacific War ended. That jeep was flown out by a friend of my older friend, a dairy farmer who himself had flown during the war and barely survived. He's long dead now, but I worked for him when I went to Australia. Thinking about the war material, so needed during war, but then left behind, I recalled reading Eisenhower's address delivered before the American Society of Newspaper Editors, April 16, 1953, titled The Chance for Peace. His words: "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It's spending the sweat of laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." I think each president of the United States should visit the museum at least once at the beginning of his or her term. It's very sobering. I've only known the man Ike as General Eisenhower. I highly respect him. Abilene, you're lucky he came home.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. He's along with us each Wednesday right here. That is our time for today, but as we go, reminding you once more that you can take full advantage of our podcast service, where you can listen to this broadcast on demand anytime you'd like, and if you'd prefer, you can have it downloaded automatically to your mobile device. Follow up on all of that at agtoday.net. That's agtoday.net. In the meantime, please rejoin us right here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.